Upon hearing the middle-aged man shout and seeing his warped expression, Hazel's eyes, which were filled with rage and hatred, gradually froze before melting into a confused and lost look. It wasn't only her. Mac and Rihanna, as well as Dwayne Dantes, fell silent. No one spoke for a moment. Even Fours, who had concealed herself, also lost the sense of excitement she originally had, no longer having that strong sense of justice. After more than 10 seconds, Max stopped looking at his assailant and turned his head to say to his bodyguards, "One of you stay here. Watch the scene and the suspect. Wait for the police." Having said that, he paused and said to his valet, "Get a few reporters to cover this matter." After preliminarily dealing with the matter, this House of Commons member of Parliament surveyed the area and discovered that several passers-by were attempting to gather over to check on what was happening. He then looked at Dwayne Dantes and apologized with a smile. "My apologies for putting you in such danger. I never expected the matter to develop this way. We did consider the actual situation of similar factory owners and coal suppliers, and we had provided them some assistance and interim measure. Who knew? Coming up with a bill is something, but the actual implementation is an entirely different matter. When atmospheric pollution becomes abnormally pressing and the various parties exert immense stress, it's no surprise that a cookie-cutter solution is employed." Klein sighed and said with a self-deprecating laugh, "There's no need to keep my feelings into consideration. I've been in even more dangerous situations in the past." On the surface, it appeared as though he was referring to his encounters when doing business in the southern continent's West Bala. In fact, he had recalled Megos, who was pregnant with an evil god spawn, the terrifying meteor that had crashed down from the sky, Cynthia, who wanted to bear a child for Admiral Amirius, and the Rose School of Thought angel and numinous episcopate monster who had collapsed the mountain outside Bayan. Compared to these, what had happened here was like a drizzle. He didn't even need to consider his own safety since there was Zio, Miss Magician, and Hazel. He didn't even take action besides dodging normally like any experienced adventurer would do. His focus was on whether this would result in a storm. Max sighed and nodded. "T can tell that you're very calm. I once doubted your experiences, but now I'm convinced. All right, Dwayne. Let's return home separately. Leave the rest to the police. If there's a need to take a statement, they will do it at your residence." Klein nodded and said to Mac and family, "Be safe." Mac nodded seriously and sighed once again. Backland's social season has just begun, and this happened. Cherish the peace we have now. Backland's social season is marked by the return of the House of Lords members of Parliament. It seems to have begun since last weekend, and this week, 2 cases have happened consecutively. The harm dealt to Baron Sindras, and the assault on Member of Parliament Mac. As he thought, Klein didn't stay put. He brought Richardson, who clearly looked a little shaken, and walked towards his carrot. When he got into it, he watched the scenery fly backward as he sighed and half closed his eye. He was presently unable to determine if the assault hadn't involved Beyonder powers, as everything that had happened could be done by ordinary people. As for the middle-aged man, he had sufficient reason to do so. This didn't need deliberate fabricating, as Klein believed that in Backland at present, there were more than one former factory owner or employer that had lost their livelihood because of similar developments. The only thing that felt questionable was that Mac was the target. Although the House of Commons were the supporters, advocates of the environmental measures, often making relevant speeches and are interviewed by the papers, he wasn't the most obvious target during the passing of the bill. In comparison, there was a higher chance that members of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council were picked as targets for revenge. Klein leaned on the carriage wall as he slowly opened his eye, seeing that it was already dark and cloudy with rain already pattering down. Once again, he realized how the maelstrom hidden beneath the seemingly calm Backland surface was intensifying. Reining in his thoughts, Klein raised his left palm and tapped his pocket. And it was what he believed to be Frank Lee's reply, and some unknown mushroom. Klein really yearned to return home to head above the gray fog, and use the newly received mushrooms to communicate with creeping hunger, doing so to regain the use of the sealed artifact. With the storm already brewing, he believed that there was a need for him to quickly be returned back to his optimal combat strength. And in this aspect, creeping hunger was essential. Unfortunately, he had 2 Beyonder bodyguards following him, so it was best if he didn't head above the gray fog for the time being. "I clearly don't need any protection, but I spent a few £100 to hire 2 people to restrict my action. How helpless I am as a tycoon," Klein finally sighed inwardly as he raised the cup of black tea that had just been prepared by Richardson. He took a sip as his facial muscles tensed up before relaxing. Klein looked down and discovered that there had been twice the number of lemon slices in his black tea than usual. He glanced at Richardson in an unnoticeable manner, and he saw that his valet was in a daze, as though he was still lost in the horror of the assault. As cowardly as usual, Klein commented inwardly as he placed the porcelain cup on the table. Late at night, 39 Buckland Street, Member of Parliament Mac's house. Hazel sat before her dressing table, looking at the gray rat sitting on a powder box. After a long silence, she said, "Was my father wrong? The matter he pushed for is clearly a good thing. There is nothing that is beneficial to everyone. There will always be those who benefit and those who suffer from it. At such times, a relevant bill or plan requires thought, compensation, and aid. If your father had done them, the problem isn't his. Conversely, it also means he's cold and ruthless," the rat said perfunctorily. Hazel recalled for a few seconds and relaxed her expression. "During dinner, I sensed that there was something very valuable hidden inside the cupboard in the pantry, but when I later got an opportunity to open it, there was nothing." The rat was taken aback as it said in thought, "Perhaps that was Dwayne Dante's bodyguard. He was recently embroiled in a suicide case, and it's said that it involves Baron syndrome. Hiring a bodyguard to protect him in secret is normal. The bodyguard inside the cupboard might also possess supernatural powers, carrying mystical items with them. That's why you were able to sense it." Hazel nodded gently and accepted the explanation before subconsciously muttering to herself, "I wonder what kinds of supernatural powers those bodyguards have." After saying that, she swept the gray rat with a puzzled look. "How do you know Dwayne Dantes was embroiled in a troublesome case?" The rat squeaked. "My present state is very suitable for me to eavesdrop into the conversations of others." As it spoke, it looked in the direction of 160 Buckland Street, the glint in its eyes shimmering. Based on the sleeping rotation, Forbes was asleep as she felt herself float to an ancient and majestic castle. In it were all kinds of Beyonder ingredients and mystical items. There were even 2 blurry tarot cards. However, she didn't take any of them away, as they were sealed by an invisible force field. Forbes looked around in an attempt to find the means to remove the seal. Finally, she saw a complicated symbol drawn at the top of the dome. It was a symbol formed from fate and concealment. "If I find an item engraved with this symbol, I'll be able to unseal some treasure." Forbes immediately came to a realization when she snapped awake. She discovered that she had curled into a ball on the carpet in the room. She had a thin silk blanket covering her. She and Zio didn't dare sleep in the reclining chair, afraid that Dwayne Dantes, who often sat in it, would notice something different. Rubbing the edges of her brows, Forbes sat up and saw Zio having her back to the wall of the master bedroom. She was seriously listening for any stirring. As Forbes walked to Zio, she said with a frown, "I feel that there is some secret hidden here. I had a strange dream, dreaming of an exaggerated treasure trove and a complicated symbol." As an astrologer, she instinctively believed that there was a problem with her dream. Noticing the serious look on Forbes' face, Zio suppressed her words of doubt and said after some thought, "Perhaps there really is some sort of secret. I once heard a proverb regarding the mysterious world. It goes, when a Beyonder element is discovered somewhere, there must be a second one. Ignoring the butler who we can't tell if he possesses Beyonder powers or not, that Miss Hazel is someone with a Beyonder element. Round her, or should I say that this street likely has a second one." Forbes nodded gently before laughing. "However, it has nothing to do with us. We will receive our remuneration tomorrow evening and terminate this bodyguard mission. We will leave this place. The most pitiful of all is Dwayne Dante. He's innocent and ordinary, but he ends up involved with troublesome matters and Beyonder elements." Having said that, Forbes looked in Zio and joked, Quickly wish him that the goddess would watch over him. Team a believer of the god of steam and machinery." "I won't be able to do so." Zio seriously considered for 2 seconds before drawing a crimson moon on her chest, piously muttering, "May the goddess bless Mr. Dwayne Dante." Forbes was snapped out of her reverie as she covered her mouth and yawned. "TLL, head out to patrol the building. It's your turn to sleep after another 15 minutes. "All right." Zio was clearly more awake than Forbes. Forbes immediately headed for the door and pressed on the wall with her outstretched hand, arriving at the corridor. She was just about to walk to the staircase when she sensed that there was a slight stir coming from the room of Dwayne Dantier's valet. For's eyes darted slightly as she cautiously headed over. She opened a tiny door in the wall and peeped in. She then saw Richardson jumping a crazy dance that had a tinge of mystery. A spirit dance. Doesn't this valet believe in the Evernight goddess? He's secretly worshipping death. Force frowned as she watched Richardson finish his spirit dance, softly praying for death's protection to help him avoid all kinds of danger. After everything came to an end, Force tusked and shook her head. She silently said to herself, "What a pitiful man Mr. Dante's." After returning to the room with the balcony, Force looked at Zio, who had her back against the wall, and whispered, "Guess what I saw? That male servant, Dante's valet, is actually a believer of death. He was dancing a spirit dance and praying." Zio widened her eyes before relaxing her expression. "When it comes to Mr. Dante's, that's the least of his concern. Yeah, that valet named Richardson is clearly of Southern Continent heritage. Perhaps he was born there, so it's not surprising that he worships death." Force replied with a smile, "I know. I just find it interesting. Aren't there a little too many people with secrets around Dwayne Dante? T won't be surprised if I were to discover one day that all the living beings in this building except him, including the housekeeper, maids, gardeners, carriage drivers, earthworms, bugs, and rats, are related to mystery and Beyonders. I would be able to easily accept that reality." Zia rolled her eyes. If that were the case, Mr. Dwayne Dantes definitely wouldn't be a simple person. Having Beyonders and supernatural creatures around him means that he might be the spawn of an evil god or a grounded angel. Without waiting for Force to expand the scope of the conversation, Zio asked, "Didn't you say that you had a strange dream involving treasure? Why aren't you curious or considering what it symbolizes? That perhaps it might actually exist?" Force chuckled. "Such a dream often implies trouble and danger. I'll consider it again if I have a chance of encountering that symbol." Although she said that, her true thoughts were, "There's quite a bit of a problem with that dream. Who knows if there's a ploy behind it? I'll consult Mr. Hanged Man, Ma'am Hermit, and Mr. World at the Tarot gathering next week before deciding what to do. They are experienced and powerful Beyonders. Perhaps they have had similar experiences." "You've matured." Zio nodded, and exerting strength in her back, she bounced off the wall and walked to the spot where Force had been sleeping before. "Mature?" Force scoffed and leaned in towards her friend. She straightened her back and looked down at her friend's hair. Without waiting for Zio to become enraged, she sighed. "You're the one who matured. Still remember this time last year. You did things based on instinct, arbitrating with your fist. From time to time, you would commit mistakes without realizing it and become lost. You're much better now." Zio was stunned as she lay down and covered herself with the thin silk blanket. With her back facing Force, she grumbled, "The main reason why I got lost was because of you being a burden by my side." Force chortled and nodded in thought. "That's a characteristic of an apprentice. It has nothing to do with me. Get it?" Seeing Zio on the floor, she walked to the wall adjacent to the master bedroom and seriously started being a bodyguard. As the night slowly passed, the sky gradually lit up. Klein got up to have breakfast and received visits from 2 batches of policemen and a batch of reporters. They were here for further investigations regarding QR6A's suicide case, while another was to obtain more details regarding Member of Parliament Mac's assault. With Walter's help, Dwayne Dantes met them and quickly handled the matters. In the afternoon, Mac suddenly visited and urged Klein, "Join me at the club for a game of tennis." He was a member of a few clubs, but there was only one club that overlapped with Dwayne Dantes, East Balham Military Veterans Mess. This is to confirm the arms deal. Klein managed to read between the lines and immediately got Richardson to get his coat, top hat, and cane. He rode on his carriage and headed to the sandy yellow unique building at Hillston Borough with the Member of Parliament. They entered the club and used the same room as before. Klein once again met the long-faced Army colonel from the Ministry of Defense, Calvin. After habitually exchanging pleasantries for a few minutes, Calvin finally focused on the main topic at hand. He looked at Dwayne Dantes and said with a chuckle, "I heard from Mac that you can have £20,000 available." "Although it will make me tight on funds, it's true that I can," Klein replied with a smile. Calvin nodded in satisfaction and said after some pondering, "There won't be any need for £20,000 for now. The batch of firearms, explosives, and small number of cannons reserved for you is in a particular warehouse in East Bala. There's not that much, enough to equip about 3,000 to 4,000 people. Based on the price of decommissioning them, it will cost £10,000 at most. Of course, you will have to give me £15,000. He didn't mince his words in any way, as though this was common in the lone military. No problem, Klein said and nodded calmly. Calvin immediately chuckled. Excellent. Macht has a keen eye for people. A person who wants to do such business absolutely mustn't be stingy. That batch of firearms is worth at least £20,000 in West Bala. If you can find a suitable buyer and fully showcase your experience in the area, it's entirely possible to sell them for £30,000 or even more. Either way, the transportation fees and escort fees will be borne by you. You will only send 2 or 3 personnel to assist you. As expected, there will be monitors. Klein listened in silence, believing that it was time that he urged Admiral of Stars and Danitz to quickly provide him with information on West Bala. He pondered for a moment and said, "Roughly when will it begin?" That batch of firearms will take another 2 weeks before being placed in the corresponding warehouse. When it happens after that period is up to you. You don't have to pay it in full at once. You can first pay £8,000 to £10,000 and pay the rest when everything is settled. Calvin wore an expression as though things were highly negotiable. 2 weeks later. That will be closer to the end of the month. I'll definitely have to wait until the party of the Snake of Fate's birth before leaving. I'm still waiting for his placenta blood. Klein's thoughts raced as he said, I'll need to carry out some preparatory work. I'll probably head to the southern continent in early July. Calvin Macht exchanged looks with Macht and gently rubbed his palm. No problem. Outside the East Bala military veterans mess, Zio and Fours hid themselves on the roof of a nearby building, monitoring the people that were coming and going. Zio knew that there were many Beyonders in the club, so she didn't dare get forced to sneak her in to provide protection to Dwayne Dantes at a close distance. All they did was wait outside. Thankfully, this is Backland. Even though there's no smog this season, there will be no lack of clouds. The sun wouldn't be too strong, otherwise my skin would definitely turn red, Fours mumbled as she hid herself in the shadow. Zio was about to say something when she saw a carriage drive into the back door of the club. It was entirely brown in color and had a trademark coat of arms. It was made of flowers and rings. Viscount Stratford's carriage, Zio silently mumbled as she hurriedly widened her eyes and focused. She then saw a familiar figure, who was a stranger to her, get off the carriage. Surrounded by bodyguards, the figure entered the East Bala military veterans mess. What's wrong? Fours noticed her friend's abnormality. Zio didn't conceal the matter as she frankly said, I saw Viscount Stratford. He also came to this club. That captain of the Royal Guards? Fours asked in surprise. Yeah. Zio nodded heavily. Fours turned agape, hoping to say something, but she was at a loss as to what to say. All she could do was look around, pretending to monitor for anything that was amiss. After a while she saw Dwayne Dantes walk out. 160 Bachland Street received another guest in the afternoon. This time it was the largest shareholder of the coin company, Ma'am Mary. I'm very sorry that my request embroiled you in such trouble. I never expected Baron Sindras to do something like that. Poor Curin. He was planning on bringing his family to Winter County for the summer. Mary Scott apologized with hints of anger. Klein replied calmly, I agree with your views on QR6N. He was really unfortunate. However, this matter probably wasn't done by Baron Sindras. It might be a trap that's targeting him. Mary nodded heavily. LVE heard of the theory. It said that the police department is planning to hire a skilled forensic pathologist to dissect the corpse to search for any missing clue. Her final sentence was automatically replaced by Klein, as the police department is planning to hire a skilled spirit medium from the Church of Evernight to examine the corpse to search for any missing clue. I wonder what will be discovered. Klein raised his right hand and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. May the goddess give QR6 peace, and that the true murderer behind his death will suffer punishment. Mary responded in the same way before saying, in order to prevent you from being affected by this matter, I plan on purchasing the shares from you ahead of time. I'll add an additional £1,000 above the highest price to date. You don't have to worry about my funds. I've recently been busy borrowing money from the banks. Klein sighed and replied, I'm very grateful for your kind intentions, but any advance transferring of the shares will need to be done with the church. I've already donated it to them. I plan on using the income I received to establish a bursary foundation that targets the poor. This was the first time Mary was hearing of such news. She was momentarily stunned and speechless. After 10 seconds, she exhaled and said, "Your character, generosity, and wisdom truly impresses me." As she said that, she looked at Dwayne Dantes with an additional look of admiration. Klein humbly diverted the compliment to the goddess before pausing. He then asked with a stern expression, "Ma'am Mary, I have a question that I hope you can answer. When you decided to clash with Baron Sindras to protect your control over the coin company, was it purely by your own will, or a result of persuasion by others?" Mary frowned and frankly replied, "All the persuasion that was directed at me was to ask me to give up." Klein immediately fell silent, as he didn't discuss the matter further. He casually mentioned Member of Parliament Max assault, before sending the lady out of 160 Bachland Street. After dinner, Walter came to the half-opened room with the balcony and said to his employer on the reclining chair, "Sir, the 2 bounty hunters have been dismissed. It cost a total of £300 for 3 days, excluding the food provided. They're finally gone." Klein immediately relaxed as he nodded, acknowledging his butler's reply. Following that, he eagerly entered the master bedroom, planning on taking out the mushrooms sent to him from Frank Lee and bringing them up above the gray fog to communicate with creeping hunger. When he came to the desk with the hidden mushrooms, he saw a letter held down by an ink bottle. Klein picked it up in puzzlement and tore it open. He quickly scanned it as his expression turned odd. "Dear Mr. Dantes, we are the bodyguards you hired. In the past few days, we discovered certain matters that we feel obligated to inform you. Therefore, we entered your bedroom to leave this letter while you were having dinner. Your butler might be researching black magic. Your valet is secretly worshipping death. Someone among your neighbors has supernatural power. The street where you live might have certain secrets that cause people to have strange dreams. You should understand some of the terms mentioned. We won't provide a further explanation. May the goddess bless you." T40 Klein looked at the letter in his hand, as he was momentarily unsure whether to laugh or cry. After a few seconds, he couldn't help but give a self-deprecating laugh. "Just from the contents of this letter, I'm really quite pitiful, and the matters described don't seem to be problematic in any way." As he shook his head with a smile, Klein held a letter in one hand and suddenly shook it to the side. Scarlet flames surged and devoured the piece of paper. "Regardless, Miss Zio and Miss Magician are rather kind people. The only problem is that what they mentioned are things I already know. In fact, I'm more aware of the reasons than they are." As Klein mumbled, he found the mushrooms he had hidden. There were a total of 4 breeds of mushroom. One was 3 dried products that could react with water and fish. The second was a new breed with golden caps, as they emitted the smell of flour. The third was white with specks of black spots. They were swollen and puffy, as though a liquid was flowing within them as they exuded the smell of milk. The fourth had strange gills running down its 2 sides. Their surface was filled with dense and soft scale. Klein swept his gaze at these mushrooms and took out a gold coin. He caught it after flicking it. After confirming the results, he took off the ordinary glove he previously wore. With his bare skin, he grabbed the 3 new mushrooms to test various scenarios that Frank Lee hadn't mentioned. They felt normal to the touch, and there weren't any changes to the mushroom. Klein heaved a sigh of relief, no longer afraid that the level of danger they possessed had exceeded his capability. He was previously afraid that these mushrooms would immediately produce roots upon contact with items of flesh and blood, devouring whatever was in its path to grow before dispersing its spore. Perhaps it's the relatively strong light from the gas wall lamps, or it might be as a result of plucking them, which causes these mushrooms to lose most of their living characteristic. They will be revived only under special conditions, such as being in the stomach of a living creature, with the intention to figure out the truth. He drew all the curtains to the master bedroom and extinguished all the wall lamps. Then he picked up the new mushrooms with his bare hand and determined that there wasn't anything abnormal about them as they hadn't fed on his body. After doing this, Klein lit the wall lamps again and set up a ritual, sacrificing the mushrooms above the gray fog. Sitting in the fool's seat, he wasn't in a rush to summon creeping hunger. He first summoned a metal bottle that had his blood inside to the long bronze table. Right on the heels of that, he poured a drop of blood on the table and piled the 3 new breeds of mushrooms onto it. In just a second, the mushrooms suddenly softened at the parts where they made contact with the blood. They squirmed as they enveloped the blood. Whatever they made contact with grew, a dense array of needle-like hair. 74. The corners of Klein's lips twitched when he saw that. He directly adjusted some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog, suppressing all the mushrooms. Then he sent the drop of blood back into the metal bottle and closed the lid. He had roughly understood the characteristics of the mushroom. Without wasting any time, he summoned creeping hunger from the junk pile. Holding the thin human-skin glove, Klein placed it on the table and removed the seal around the mushroom. Then he saw the creeping hunger support itself with its 5 fingers before standing up with great difficulty. It began retreating rapidly like it was playing a piano. "So you do no fear." Klein revealed a genial smile. He pressed the glove down and gifted it with some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. Then he grabbed a mushroom with his other hand and brought it close to creeping hunger. Human-skinned glove struggled with all its might, but ultimately failed to escape his grasp as it clearly began trembling. Klein stopped moving the hand with the mushroom and chuckled. "Are you still going to randomly praise the true creator?" Creeping hunger continued struggling without giving a reply. Klein thought for a moment before he compromised. "TL allow you to praise once a day. In the day or in the evening." Creeping hunger's struggling weakened, but it didn't stop. Thus, Klein continued negotiating with an unperturbed expression, "Thrice a day. During breakfast, lunch, and dinner time. However, you will need to warn me ahead of time." Creeping hunger struggled twice before sprawling onto the desk, motionless. After another round of negotiations, Klein successfully reached an agreement with creeping hunger. However, eating daily was instinctual to the item. It was unable to be weakened much as a result of the negotiation. Therefore, he needed to wait for the sealing method provided by Isaac. At present, what Klein could do was bring creeping hunger around without it eating. However, he needed to come up with a meal within 24 hours. How troublesome, thankfully, after creeping hunger fused with Mr. A and the mushroom, its living characteristic has strengthened. Otherwise, there would be no way to make any negotiations with it, Klein commented wistfully. Finally, he did a divination regarding the recent matters, and he received a conclusion that there wasn't too much danger. He also got confirmation that Qrain's suicide was a result of the influence of a Bayon. After busying himself with all of that, he left the gray fog and returned to the real world and continued waiting for Mr. Isaac's reply. On Saturday evening, Klein, who wore a formal suit, arrived at St. Samuel Cathedral with Richardson on a carriage to participate in the charity party. After passing through the main entrance, he was led by a priest to a huge adjacent hall. There was a baldachin with the sacred emblem representing the Evernight goddess placed inside. High above were a few miniature crystal chandeliers that hung down. In front of it were thin and long candles, as well as overturned round metal lids used to store wax. At this moment all of them had been lit, illuminating the hall with brightness. It had quite a holy feeling to it. Klein glanced over and saw a series of neatly arranged seats and guests who wore out of the ordinary attire. Among them, the women mainly wore 2 types of clothing. One was dresses that were either bright or dark colors, and they were bold and liberal in their dressing, allowing one to see the fair flesh at their bosoms or their shoulders. The other type wore pure and fresh colors in relatively conservative dressing. Even their collar bones could hardly be seen. Some of them even had theirs concealed. Based on what Klein knew, this was the difference between married and unmarried women in the Lone Kingdom. As for widows and divorced, they could choose between the two. However, the former tended to choose darker color. Aside from those, Klein also saw shimmering necklaces and exquisite earrings, as well as all kinds of valuable accessories. They were a lot more impressive than what the guests that attended the ball or banquet which Macton himself had hosted. After walking into the hall, Klein greeted the bishops Mact and others he knew and exchanged pleasantries. At this moment, there was a sound from the door as many guests turned to look back, revealing their smiles as they walked over. When Klein looked over, his gaze first lit up before it froze. At the entrance to the hall, the most attractive one, there was a girl with lustrous blonde hair that softly cascaded down her shoulder. Her beautiful eyes were green like emeralds. They appeared like the sea which hid a maelstrom within, making anyone who looked at her unable to move their gaze away. Her facial features were pretty, and she had an outstanding bearing. Her looks were nearly flawless, making the men and women present find it difficult to notice what kind of dress she was wearing or the designer of her jewelry. However, Klein had swept his gaze to the necklace at her collarbone. A lustrous and perfect pearl was being embedded within the crevice between the intersection of her collarbone. It softened the lines at her neck, making her accentuate a clean and mesmerizing feel. Klein had met her before and he knew her. She was none other than the Tarot Club's Miss Justice. Back when she used magic mirror divination, Klein had seen her before. Immediately, Klein moved his gaze away, without daring to take another look. This was an instinctive reaction of his, as he knew that Miss Justice was a beyonder of the spectator pathway. If he garnered her attention, it was very easy for her to read his true thoughts and secrets based on the changes in his expressions and body language. But his racing mind quickly forced him to turn his head back as he continued casting his gaze at Miss Justice. He discovered that him avoiding her had made it worse and more obvious. How could a gentleman who liked all kinds of women not take a few more glances when encountering such an abnormally beautiful lady? At the same time, Audrey sensed the abnormality of a particular man. His sideburns are a little white. His looks and bearing aren't bad, making him appear profound. This is likely Mr. Dwayne Dentes, who donated more than £10,000 in an attempt to establish a bursary foundation for the poor. His reaction was a little odd, as though he was trying to hide something. To Audrey, Dwayne Dentes' act of moving his gaze away was actually very normal. He had encountered many similar situations in the past. Some men would indeed subconsciously turn their heads away after seeing her, as though afraid that she would notice it, or that they would make eye contact, exposing their moment of being mesmerized. Therefore, what was odd wasn't that Dwayne Dentes had moved his gaze away. Instead, he had turned his gaze back again. In addition, Audrey felt that the greatest problem was that the gentleman's emotions were more of shock instead of amazement. What's he shocked about? What is he trying to hide? With her questions, Audrey greeted her parents and brother, and the people that gathered over with a faint smile. Seeing Miss Justice no longer paying attention to him, Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief as he began thinking. I need to be careful later and play the role of Dwayne Dantes well. I mustn't let a spectator notice any problem. Regardless of whether Miss Justice noticed it or not, I've already thought of the excuse for my abnormal reaction. Miss Justice is indeed a lady from a powerful aristocratic family. I wonder what her last name is exactly. I'll ask Mact or Bishop Electra later. Amidst his thoughts, Klein frowned slightly, having a nagging feeling that he was being watched. Following his spiritual intuition, he swept his gaze towards the door. Outside the door in the shadows, there was a golden retriever sitting there silently. Spectator, when the ghostly gaze of the golden retriever pierced through the curtains from the shadows, Klein's brows indiscernibly twitched as he failed to hide his alarm. He then naturally shifted his gaze away and looked towards Miss Justice and company. How terrifying! Why is that dog sitting in the corner, hiding in the shadows for no good reason? It was silently looking at everyone in the hall. Miss Justice seems to have fed a spectator potion to an animal and had once asked Mr. Hanged Man for advice. Don't tell me it's that golden retriever. 2 spectators, one out in the open and one in the dark. Which actor can handle that? In high society, Miss Justice and the dog are unlikely to be the only spectator. Her joining the psychology alchemists was a result of other nobles as well. It seems like it was done by Duchess Negan's sister. As Klein lampooned and analyzed, he walked to Mac's family and asked in a seemingly casual manner. The ones who just entered seemed to be very noble people. Mac glanced Dwayne Dentes and chuckled. Eastchester Earl's family. You can directly call him Earl Hall. You should have heard of him. That's his wife, Ma'am Caitlin. That's his eldest son, Lord Hibbert. You should have already met him. Upon hearing Mac's introduction, Klein suddenly broke out into a cold sweat. This was because he had indeed met Hibbert Hall at the ball Mac had hosted. However, he had failed to notice the Lord, or he wouldn't have raised the question. I was shocked by Miss Justice's sudden appearance. Klein maintained his smile and listening stance. Mac continued, that's his daughter, Miss Audrey Hall. In the social scene over the past 2 years, she has the title of being the most stunning gem in backline. It's very apt, isn't it? Without waiting for Dwayne Dentes' reply, he minced his words by saying, she is courted by princes, duke heirs, and many honorable excellencies and gentlemen. Mac's concealed meaning was clear. He was saying to this man, one who liked all kinds of women, not to place his sights on the lady. She was a target he had no thoughts of making contact. As for Klein, he was having other thoughts. So Miss Justice is Earl Hall's daughter. It's no wonder she's so rich. It's no wonder she's never bargained. Earl Hall is one of the top bankers in the kingdom. He's the most influential member of Parliament of the House of Lords, and one of the hereditary peerage. His wealth is much more than Baron Syndra's. Even if Miss Justice is unable to inherit the aristocratic title and family estate, the wealth she will inherit will be at least £100,000. With her looks, birth, and character, she is indeed the best choice for a marriage partner with the royal family or powerful noble. However, the way she has been repeatedly buying mystical items doesn't look like she's someone with a wealth of only a few £100,000. She's able to claim it from her father. I also wish to have one like that. Amidst his racing thoughts, Klein replied to Mac's warning with a smile. I've heard of the various rumors about Miss Audrey. It's only today that I have realized that they aren't that exaggerated. Unfortunately, I'm not a prince or the heir to a duke, marquis, viscount, or earl. Otherwise, I would also be one of her pursuers. He was implying that he knew his status and standing. Mac didn't continue the topic, and began introducing the various guests he knew to Dwayne Dante. He had truly led him into high society. Of course, the greatest supporter involved in this was the Church of Evernight. Without the charity party they held for the foundation, Mac wouldn't have the chance to bring Dwayne Dantes to meet so many honorable people. Marquis Losant, Earl Gross, Viscount Loveland. The aristocratic believers of the goddess separately exchanged pleasantries with Dwayne Dantes with a rather genial attitude. Before Mac was done with the introductions, an elder walked into the hall. He was wearing a black clergyman robe with red accents. By his chest hung 5 dark sacred emblems. He was clean-shaven, and his eyes were deep, dark, and tranquil. Including Earl Hall, everyone turned to face the elder and respectfully bowed. Good evening, Your Grace. This elder was none other than St. Anthony Stevenson, one of the 13 archbishops of the Church of Evernight. He was the person in charge of the Backland diocese, and he was part of the upper echelons of the church in the true sense of the word. When Klein saw the archbishop, his body and mind involuntarily trembled as he found it difficult to hide it. It was as though he stumbled upon a grave on an unlit village trail back when he was young. He swept his gaze and saw that the other guests didn't have any strong reaction. He immediately realized that the horror, which St. Anthony carried with him, was more clearly felt by people with stronger spirituality. He hurriedly entered cogitation in an attempt to calm himself down. When he managed to control his trembling, St. Anthony had already smiled. He surveyed the area and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. Praise the lady. Praise the lady, the guests at the charity party replied one after another. With the archbishop's arrival, Mac stopped introducing Klein to the other guests because the party had officially begun. According to convention, everyone would take their seats and piously pray to the goddess for 3 minutes. Following that, the cathedral would begin singing and walk to the baldachin, and use their ethereal, uniform, and seemingly cathartic voices to praise the goddess. After the religious ritual ended, a lector received St. Anthony's instructions to stand to the side of the choir. There was a podium there with all kinds of books placed on it. Everyone, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Your character is a resplendent star in the serene night. Electra first said a few words of pleasantries before saying, our establishment of a bursary foundation that targets the poor stems from Mr. Dwayne Dantes' suggestion. He is truly an honorable gentleman. His piousness and character are impeccable, and a definite role model to others. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Dwayne Dantes to give everyone a brief speech. Although Klein was already prepared, he drew a gasp inwardly when he heard the last sentence. This was different from usual. There were 2 or even more spectators around. It wasn't something that he could bullshit through if he wanted to. The content of his speech needed to be sufficiently realistic, without them being able to see through his lies or fake example. Pressing down his clothes at his abdomen, he quickly stood up and walked to the podium as he buttoned his suit. Coming behind the podium and steadying himself, he surveyed the nobles, members of parliament, clergymen, and high-ranking civil servants. He said with a smile, I'm a little nervous. This is my first time being stared at by so many people of such honorable standing. T was once active in a region where the poor gather. I was active in the chaotic southern continent and thus saw many things. There was a young lady, who helped her mother make pasted matchboxes from the age of 6. If she didn't do that, they wouldn't even have the money to buy rye bread after paying rent. The rye bread they eat is filled with milkfeed, and occasionally they will bite into gravel or rocks. The hardness make it usable as a rod to attack others. When this girl gradually grew up, although she led a laborious daily life, and her family lacked any additional funds, she still looked forward to the night schools run by the church. She wished to study how to read in order to grasp knowledge. This is because she knew that only by doing so could she stop living the way she did. Only by doing so would she not starve and be able to wear clothes that could really protect her from the cold. She wouldn't need to work at factories with harsh conditions and end up dying in her 20s. Klein had selected a portion of the experiences of the poor kids he had met before, merging them together as he conveyed them with his true feeling. He could clearly see many ladies more or less reveal looks of empathy. A number of girls even had their eyes flicker, such as Audrey Hall. She really is an easily moved child. I've acted from the bottom of my heart. I've even moved myself, much less a spectator. However, most gentlemen aren't moved. Some of them seem to already be aware of the situations of the poor. Some do not mind those of the lower class. Klein swept his gaze as he continued. Our industry has been developing. In the future, we will definitely need more literate workers. Our election criteria has been relaxed. In the future, the ones who are eligible to vote will definitely include most of the educated. With the empathy towards these poor children and my expectations of the kingdom's future, I've decided to donate all my Coim Company shares that I have on hand to establish a bursary foundation that targets the poor. It lets them have the opportunity to enter official institutes of higher learning after attending the free night classes. Earl Hall, who had a beautiful mustache, nodded when he heard that. He was the first to raise his hands to gently clap. Amidst the vigorous applause, Klein returned to the seat belonging to him. Bishop Electra headed up and announced, the shares that Mr. Dwayne Dentes donated are valued at £15,000. He would use it to establish a lone charity bursary foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you agree with him and pity those children who thirst for knowledge, you can contribute to this foundation. As he spoke, he pointed at the donation box beside him. Audrey retracted her gaze and pressed the corner of her eye and said to her father, Father, I plan on donating £1,000. What about you? As she spoke, her mind quickly summarized what she had observed. Dwayne Dantes has likely lived a lower-class life. His pity, empathy, and speech were all very realistic. Those poor children are truly pitiful. Just now, when the bishop mentioned that the shares were valued at £15,000, the corners of his lips twitched unnaturally. From the looks of it, he likely feels the pinch over donating the money. However, the sincerity of him donating it doesn't seem fake. This means that he's a gentleman who loves money, but he loves kindness even more. Why was he shocked when he saw me, and what is he hiding? He has seen me somewhere before, but doesn't know my identity. There's no need to hide that. He identified my necklace as a mystical item, so he was shocked before trying to attempt to hide this matter. If that's the case, it means that he's definitely a Beyonder, one that isn't a low-sequence Beyonder. I'll ask Susie later when I'm back. Perhaps she noticed other details. She was hiding in the darkness, so he wouldn't be on his guard against her, allowing her to discover more. Midst her thoughts, Audrey saw her father smile as he took out a checkbook and fountain pen. The value he wrote down was £10,000. Suggestion £10,000. Audrey blinked as she used a very slight change in expression to express her surprise. Without needing her to voice out her question, Earl Hall had noticed her puzzlement. He chuckled and said, This is an insightful man. His ideas have inspired me and resonated with me. Besides, we can't ignore the misery that objectively exists just because it cannot be resolved anytime soon. Audrey vaguely understood her father, but she felt that she didn't fully understand him. She nodded slightly and took out her checkbook from her purse that matched her dress and wrote down the £1,000 value. This was a charity ball. Furthermore, it was held in a side hall of the cathedral, so there weren't any dances or extravagant arrangements. There weren't any valets or ladies' maids following by their side. It was simply a charity event that had some degree of donations involved. The ladies undoubtedly brought their bags on them. The guests subsequently threw their checks into the donation box and headed for the two long tables for some beverages or simple food. After which, they walked around the hall socializing instead of sitting. This was closer to that of a buffet party. Klein also accompanied Electra and came to St. Anthony's side and was introduced to him. St. Anthony smiled in response to Dwayne Dantes' greeting. He sized him up and said, "Very good. We are proud to have a believer like you. TT's the goddess that has taught us that character is more important than status. Therefore, you are an extremely honorable gentleman." To be frank, faced with this saint, Klein's heart was drumming because deities or beyonders related to the fate domain was able to see the gray fog's aura on him. For example, everyone from the monster pathway or the Evernight goddess who wielded the authority of misfortune. As for St. Anthony, if he was a high-sequence beyonder of the sleepless pathway and grasped beyonder powers involving misfortune, then there was a chance that he could see that there was a problem with Dwayne Dante. As such, Klein had headed above the gray fog to divine so before attending the charity party. He received the answer that there wasn't any danger. Since the goddess didn't say anything, even if her archbishop were to discover some problems, he will probably feign ignorance, Klein replied with a warm smile. I've been to the cathedral frequently to pray and listen to Bishop Electra's preachings in recent time. Even my soul seems to have been cleansed. Therefore, I abided by the goddess's teachings to pass such beauty and hope to others. St. Anthony nodded and said, in front of the goddess, all believers are differentiated by their character, regardless if they are nobles or commoners, male or female. They are all the same. To hope those people who live in poor environments will liberate themselves of fear and receive serenity. Praise the lady. Klein and Electra tapped their chests 4 times in a clockwise fashion. Praise the lady. Seeing St. Anthony turn towards the other believers, Klein planned on heading over to the table to get a glass of champagne to quench his thirst. At this moment, he saw a gentleman approach him. This man had somewhat loose skin with an obvious potbelly. However, it could be seen that he was rather handsome in his youth. Even now, his blue eyes that had a smile on them and his beautiful mustache made him appear good-looking. Klein had previously learned from Mac's introduction and knew he was the House of Lords member of Parliament and powerful banker, Earl Hall. Of course, to him, the most important identity of this noble was that he was Miss Justice's father. And Audrey happened to be by his side. She was observing Dwayne Dantes with her bright eyes, awaiting her conversation with the gentleman later. This made Klein immediately feel a little uncomfortable. I need to present the persona that matches Dwayne Dantes, a person of ordinary birth who's working hard to get himself into high society. At this moment, he's bound to be a little nervous and restrained. Likewise, a gentleman who loves beautiful women will feel the same feelings when faced with the most stunning gem in Backlund's eye. But he will also unknowingly showcase his own breadth of knowledge and show his charms to express his desire. Yes, an experienced tycoon who survived the chaos must be someone who has pride and confidence hidden in him. No matter what he faces, he will try his best to appear calm, respectful but not sycophantic. Klein's thoughts raced as he smiled and politely said to the approaching Earl Hall, "Honorable Earl, I happen to see the check you donated. Your kindness and generosity truly impresses me. Yet you've never flaunted that or informed others how much you've donated." Earl Hall chuckled. "No, compared to you, the price I pay is far inferior to what you may." Between the lines, he meant that £15,000 might be a tenth of Dwayne Dantes' overall wealth or even a fifth, but £10,000 to him was just a thousandth or even lesser. Clearly, the former paid a greater price, and his willingness to do was even more pure. From my point of view, as long as the poor who yearn to use knowledge to change their fates can be helped, all donations are kind and sufficiently benevolent. From this angle, the only difference between £10,000 and £15,000 is just £5,000. Klein tried hard to express his sincerity as he deliberately glanced at the listening blonde girl without leaving a trace. He knew that an ordinary without a trace was obvious in the eyes of a spectator. Audrey wore a faint smile as she silently listened to her father's and Dwayne Dantes' conversation, as though she hadn't noticed the gentleman peek at her. This made Klein lack confidence from his failure at receiving any feedback in his performance. Earl Hall laughed and said, "Then we shall agree to disagree. This isn't anything bad. At the very least, we are praising one another. T can tell that you once had a difficult period and had once led the life of the poor." Klein nodded and said, "I do not avoid such a past. They are my valuable riches. And this is something me and my friends lack," Earl Hall commented with a smile. And it's because of this that you possess a unique and wise point of view. I hope there will be opportunities in the future to work with you. That is also something I look forward to, Klein replied with a suitable level of sincerity. Earl Hall pointed to the side and said, "A couple of friends are waiting for me. I hope that your charitable ways and wealth keep increasing." Klein didn't drag on the conversation as he drew the crimson moon on his chest. "Praise the lady. Praise the lady." Earl Hall and Audrey tapped their chests in a clockwise fashion in unison. Watching them walk past him and in another direction, Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Suddenly, he tensed up as he naturally looked around the hall and noticed the shadow at the door. Silently sitting there was the golden retriever. On the carriage back to Empress Borough, Earl Hall, who looked like he was resting with his eyes closed, looked at his daughter and said, "Audrey, didn't you mention that you wish to join one of the church's charitable organizations? Are you interested in joining this bursary foundation?" Audrey had already sensed that her father might have such thoughts back in the cathedral, so she expressed the appropriate level of surprise and confusion. "TT's only a small charity foundation." Audrey's brother, Hibbert Hall, argued for his sister. Earl Hall shook his head and laughed. "TVE asked a few bishops. The total amount of donations tonight has already reached £100,000. Why do you think there's so much?" Hibbert frowned slightly as he said in thought, "They were bribed." At the same time, Audrey gave her own point of view. Knowledge and the relaxing of the electoral qualification. Earl Hall nodded and sighed. Nothing is an essential existence, including humans themselves as well as the nobility. He then looked at Audrey and said with a smile, "There's no need to force yourself. I can get others to join the Bursary Foundation. I just wish that you will gain more knowledge because of this, and now view certain matters as definite and immutable. Even if you miss this, there will be other charity organizations." "Father, I'll consider it," Audrey replied seriously. After hearing Dwayne Dante's recount of the stories of the poor, she had already decided on joining to gather more donations, to contact the government, and organize events to contribute her efforts to the cause. She was hesitant because she felt that the middle-aged man was a little problematic. After returning home, Audrey immediately brought Susie to her room and closed the door. "What's your take on that Mr. Dwayne Dantes?" Audrey asked directly. The golden retriever sat opposite her and thought. "He seems to know you or something on you. Also, a lot of the time, he's acting and leaving a certain degree of clues. He seemed to be guarded against me. He's extremely sharp. Yes, I noticed it too. He might be a Beyonder. He acted very well, but it's still an act. However, this is also very ordinary. At a social event and faced with different people, we would all play different roles and engage in a corresponding act," Audrey said in thought. "The biggest problem stems from his shock when he saw me. He was almost horrified. Also, he was embroiled in 2 cases, one after another, especially with that case regarding Baron Syndrome. It seems to have some Beyonder elements involved in it, with signs of someone being cued to do so." Susie gaped her mouth, unable to give a definitive explanation. All she could do was woof. Audrey began another train of thought. "I'll get someone to investigate Dwayne Dantes, and after confirming that there aren't any major problems, I'll join the Bursary Foundation. All right, it's almost Monday. I can request Fours and Mr. Moon. They're both in Backland, Monday afternoon at 3. Dark red beams shot up in the Grand Palace, materializing into blurry figures. Audrey quickly surveyed the area and looked to the seat of honor at the bronze, long table and bowed with a smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool Tilda." Upon hearing Miss Justice's greeting, the Fool Klein suddenly had a strong, wistful feeling. After knowing her identity, status, looks, and situation, he had a deeper understanding as to why Audrey's tone had a happy and radiant air. He understood where they essentially came from, but he didn't end up envious or jealous because of that, nor did he believe that she lacked the toughness that was brought about by misery. Instead, he felt that in this world that had chaos, warped, and madness underlying it, having such a lady exist was really nice. A smile surfaced on his face as he gently nodded as an acknowledgement of Miss Justice's greeting. After the Tarot Club members exchanged greetings, Catlia nudged her glasses and turned her body sideways. She bowed in the direction of the blurry figure that was enveloped by gray fog at the end of the long bronze table. "Honorable Mr. Fool, there are 3 diary pages this time. Queen Mystic has finally come online again, Klein lampooned and said with a smile, "Very good." A few seconds later, Katlia conjured the diary pages after receiving approval before seeing them leap into Mr. Fool's hand. Klein glanced at it casually when his heart skipped a beat. He realized that the diary pages provided by Queen Mystic depicted Emperor Rosel's early days. It didn't seem to contain anything important. Logically speaking, when being unable to distinguish the importance of entries, one will definitely prioritize the later diary entry. This would best restore the mystery as to why Emperor Rosel was agitated. I believe Queen Mystic is sufficiently clever. As Klein wondered to himself inwardly, he began seriously reading the first page. 21st September. Arrived at St. Millum. I've officially begun my first state visit. Faceac's weather is really a little cold. It's not even October, and it looks like it's about to snow. It's no wonder it's famous for its various coats and winter wear, as well as its liquor. FCK, the people here are ridiculously tall, as expected of a country that descended from giants. However, I have to say that I hate it when people look down on me. Tonight, I'll be going to a bar to find a Faceac beauty to share some drinks. Upon reading this, Klein suddenly suspected if Queen Mystic Bernadette's question was if she had a brother of Faceac descent. Holding back his tusking inwardly, Klein swept his gaze to the second diary entry. 22nd September. I think I blacked out. What happened last night? What happened to my Faceac beauty? I actually lost out to her in drinking. The embassy staff told me that the women here are often better at drinking than men. Tea should show some temperance when I head to bars in the future. I sure don't want some ugly, middle-aged woman to do unspeakable things to me when I black out. The alcohol here sure is strong. My headache has lasted an entire day. Thankfully, my stomach doesn't hurt. I should sleep early. I'll be visiting the Great Twilight Hall tomorrow. 23rd September. The Great Twilight Hall is indeed grand. It's like a myth materializing into reality. That building seems to be completely prepared for giants. Since I don't share their faith, I could only circle the perimeter. The square at the bottom of the Great Twilight Hall is also filled with the fragrance of alcohol. There were plenty of people there, some kneeling, some sitting, others playing musical instruments. They exude a rather relaxed and open feeling. I got to know a Faceacian who blows a bone flute. Compared to his kinsmen, he's ridiculously tall. He's roughly 3 meters tall. His name is Honegger, and he claims to be from one of the clans in Faceac that have the purest giant bloodline. The way he plays the bone flute looks very sorrowful, as though he doesn't belong here but has no idea where to go to. Compared to the skirt chasers at Intis, he's a lot more like a poet. Now that I mention it, I really can't help but give some criticism. Those guys seem to wear any sexual diseases as a badge of honor. It just messes up the entire social market. T had a chat with Honegger for a while and raised my question from before. He said that he's only homesick. But the problem lies in the fact that he's a true blue native from St. Millum. He has never left this place before. Honegger didn't immediately reply to me as he played the bone flute for a few more minutes. He later told me that he misses the origins of the giant bloodline, the giant king's court mentioned in myths. He told me that he and his clan of Faceacians often dream of tall mountains that are used as giant city walls. It's a palace forever bathed in twilight's glow, with tall towers and other kinds of buildings. It resembles the Great Twilight Hall, but it's even more fascinating, epic, and miraculous. Without anyone needing to tell them, Honegger and his clansmen believe that it's the giant king's court. Towards the end of our conversation, Honegger slowly stood up and thanked me for listening. He was going to leave Faceac to seek out the giant king's court, to find the home of his soul. He believed that in the zone at the easternmost front of the Sanya Sea, there might be a path that leads to the giant king's court. He said that a millennia has passed, but the giants have never forgotten their home. Now it's his turn to follow the footsteps of his ancestors. This path would never stop until the destination is reached. He played the bone flute again and gradually left amidst that ethereal and sorrowful tune. Home, home. Upon reading this, Klein felt for the first time that his feelings resonated with the emperor. Although Rosel only wrote the word that seemed to repeat without describing his feelings, Klein could understand the undulating feelings within the emperor. This was because he and Rosel were like Honegger. They had a home they belonged to spiritually. Sighing inwardly, Klein flipped to the second diary page. 10th January. Visited Sonya Island. This place is also called Ancient Elf Island. It has plenty of elvish ruins and customs left over. T was surprised on the first day. The elves actually make blood cake, and they enjoy eating animal organs and are good at using spices. They even invented chopsticks. Thinking about the elvish depictions on the murals, apart from their blue hair, their facial contours and eyes are similar to Asians on Earth. Could they be my fellow countrymen? Yes, back then, I had such suspicions as well. However, it's impossible for so many people to transmigrate at once, since it's almost an entire race. I felt that I was overthinking matters, but it doesn't make sense that the customs and cutlery that appears on Earth won't appear here, Klein thought in interest as he quickly continued reading. He wanted to know if Roselle had gotten to the bottom of it. 13th January. I've been so busy searching for writings, relics, and folk tales that I forgot to write my diary for a few days. Although many objects have been taken away by the various churches, I've still obtained something of value. Various legends have it that Elf King Sonithrim created chopsticks. There are records of him using animal organs and blood to cook delicacies. There are stories of this ancient god being good at identifying and using spices. It's acknowledged that he is their founding ancestor, the first elf. Due to certain reasons, he led the race and left the western continent that only existed in legends, bringing them to the northern continent. Could it be that this is a fellow countryman of mine, a transmigrator? He later produced an entire race. There's nothing ancient gods can't do, including having children. He apparently had a wife who was also an elf. I'll need to think this through. 16th January. After further investigation, elves might really have nothing to do with transmigrators. At the very least, they didn't leave behind any Chinese, English, or other symbol. They have likely been using Elvish all the time. Nothing of it gives me a sense of familiarity. Furthermore, the inventions we have in common didn't appear before I came. Likewise for famous quotes. There are only proverbs and idioms with similar meanings, but with a completely different choice of words. From all the items and legends I have now, none of them support my theory. This is a little disappointing, but it also makes me relieved. If I were to encounter another transmigrator or other transmigrators, I really have no idea how to face them. 17th January. I dreamed of the home I've nearly forgotten. Indeed, the Emperor more or less gave up on that theory. Klein flipped to the next page and saw the final diary entry. 2nd April. My daughter is smart. She can speak before the age of 1. Although she has only learned a few words, I believe that her subsequent development can't be slow. She must have inherited this from me. No matter how I look, she looks a little like how I looked like on Earth. Could it be that a soul will also bring about some level of inheritance? Haha, I'll just treat it as so. Bernadette, this name is quite good. It sounds beautiful, but deep in my heart, I keep having the urge to give her a Chinese nickname. Sigh, she won't get to see her real grandmother and grandfather. 3rd April. I suffered from insomnia last night because of the wistful thoughts I suddenly had yesterday. Thankfully, I know cogitation. However, this also made me consider a problem. That is whether I should secretly teach Bernadette Chinese. No, I can't. If she were to understand the diary entries her father had previously written, I'd rather kill myself. In my daughter's heart, her father is filled with honor. However, using Chinese to write my diary is my final tether to Earth and my past. My daughter should inherit this tether to a certain extent. 6th April. After a few days of consideration, I've decided to teach Bernadette 2 Chinese characters as though they are special symbols. I'll tell her that this is a protective incantation that her father is giving her, and that she is to remember it forever. She doesn't need to know the corresponding meaning. All she needs to do is to remember it. The word in Chinese is home. Home, Klein repeated this word again, as he felt his eyes redden a little. He finally understood why Queen Mystic had chosen these 3 diary pages. This was because it was the protective symbol her father had left her. Home. At this moment, Klein seemed to see a river of emotion. Its surface was flowing silently, but there were infinite eddies flowing underneath, churning without end. Klein retracted his gaze and made the diary pages disappear. Looking up at Katlia, he asked, "What's your question?" Mission. When looking at Katlia, Klein had actually guessed what her request would be as he sighed and felt confident. How did Mr. Fool know that I'll be asking a question and not making a request, as expected of Mr. Fool? Katlia thought before politely asking, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I would like to know the meaning of these two symbols. After receiving permission, she conjured the Chinese characters. They were Gu and Xiang. As expected, Klein sighed silently. When combined together, they mean home, the homeland for one's soul. When combined together, the homeland for one's soul, Katlia placed the emphasis on the second sentence because she knew very well where home was for Queen Mystic, nor did she believe that it was anything special. Audrey, Alger, and the other Tarot Club members took the opportunity to learn the new Roselle text and tried hard to memorize the symbols and their combined meaning, except Derek. Klein didn't speak further as he leaned back into his chair. You may begin. Alger immediately turned his head and looked at the world. Your mystical item is ready. I'll give it to you this week. He was referring to the mystical item, made from an ocean, songster's Beyonder characteristic. The artisan had first rushed to finish Miss Justice's glove. As for the world's request, it had been delayed until this week. With Mr. Azek not replying yet, and with me unable to restore the seal on creeping hunger, this mystical item's arrival is timely. Klein controlled the world and made him nod. That's still an acceptable speed. An acceptable speed, if I had delayed it for another 2 to 3 weeks or even a year, would you be teleporting to me? Alger thought with a baffling sense of wariness. As his original plan was to obtain the cataclysmic Intera potion from the church, and with him just beginning to digest the ocean songster potion, he wasn't looking to purchase any corresponding Beyonder ingredients. He fell silent again and began watching the other members begin their transaction. Alger, the most important thing now was to obtain 1 or 2 mystical items to match with Whip of Mine. After all, although mystical items were more about quality than quantity, with the need to avoid having the negative effects stacking with each other, to only have 1 mystical item for a sequence 5 Beyonder was quite an embarrassment. Under normal circumstances, sequence 5 Beyonders would have 2 or 3 mystical items whose negative effects didn't overlap, making them the best combination. Of course, Alger had already reserved one. Once the artisan finished the world's item, it would be his 6-winged gargoyle's core crystal. For that, he needed to pay 1,000 pounds. Together with the fee he needed to pay for the world, the little amount of money he had was reduced by 2,000 pounds, leaving him with 1,800 pounds. Out of that, 500 pounds was a commission he had earned from Miss Justice's glove. With no one speaking, Emlyn looked at the sun and asked after some deliberation, I need a sequence 5's artificial vampire's Beyonder characteristic. What do you wish to get in exchange? In recent times, he had learned that the Sanguine had the means to eliminate the mental corruption of a Beyonder characteristic, but he needed to make sufficient contributions to make an application. Therefore, Emlyn wished to first obtain the main ingredient needed for advancement before considering the other problem. Based on his observations, such a sequence 5 artificial vampire Beyonder characteristic roughly cost 8,000 pounds based on Mr. World's pricing. As for himself, he only had 5,400 pounds and was still a little short. Based on Emlyn's original thoughts and habits, he needed to save up 8,000 pounds before requesting a trade with the sun. He wasn't a sanguine who liked to buy things on credit, even for the newest and best doll. Nor could he thicken his skin to borrow from others. All he would do is be more frugal, work harder and save up more. However, he quickly realized something. The sun didn't accept cash. The residents of the City of Silver, loans cash was no different from scrap paper. Therefore, Emlyn believed that the sun would make a request for an item, so it was better to learn of it to prepare it ahead of time. Furthermore, the sun doesn't understand the market prices. Perhaps the thing he wants only costs 5,000 pounds. In the hopes of being pleasantly surprised, Emlyn lifted his chin slightly and looked at the sun beside him. Derek thought seriously and said, Sun Pathway Sequence 5 Potion Formula. He originally wished to request him to repay his debt with Mr. World, but he realized that Mr. World hadn't raised any requests at all. Hence, he didn't find it appropriate to relegate it to someone else. In addition, having participated in so many tarot gatherings, Derek was no longer the newcomer who knew nothing. With the City of Silver having an exchange standard, he knew the difference between a Sequence 6 Notary Potion Formula and a Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic very well. Using the former to cover the debt of the latter would be a terrible deal. Therefore, he changed his request to the Sequence 5 Potion Formula. Sequence 5 Potion Formula. That's very difficult to purchase. It will cost between 4,500 to 7,000 pounds. It will mainly depend on how urgent both parties are. Also, there's a cost to verifying its authenticity too. Lin was just about to answer when he heard Mr. World's hoarse voice sound. T have it. Instantly, the palace that looked like a giant's residence fell silent. All the Tarot Club members appeared a little wooden. Is sequence 5 that common? Lin felt down when he realized that he still wasn't at sequence 5 yet. After calming down, he asked, how much will it cost? Considering Lin White's financial situation, Klein made the world chortle deep. 5,000 pounds. Priest of Light Potion Formula. 5,000 pounds. Lin was first taken aback before he said without hesitation, deal. It was like he was facing a discount for a doll he had been longing for. All right. The world nodded as though it wasn't a major transaction. Then he saw Miss Justice look around and hear her say, I'd like to commission an investigation mission. Investigation mission. The fool Klein's heart skipped a beat as the world's expression turned somewhat sluggish. What is it? Forbes asked proactively. Her impression of Miss Justice's commissions was that they were relatively simple while paying handsomely. She definitely needed to take it. Audrey organized her words and said, there have been 2 matters that happened in Backland recently. One is Baron Syndra's. He was suspected to have been framed. The other is Member of Parliament Mact being assaulted because of the environmental measures. Forbes found Miss Justice's description especially familiar because she had been present for the 2 matters. She had witnessed them and was involved in them. She unknowingly straightened her back, waiting for Miss Justice to continue. And in these 2 matters, there is a tycoon named Dwayne Dantes involved. He came to Backland 2 months ago, and he had donated more than 10,000 pounds of shares to the Church of Evernight in an attempt to establish a bursary foundation that targets the poor. Audrey described using a tone as though she had never directly interacted with him, and was simply suspecting something about him from the data and rumors she had received. I wish to hire someone to investigate the actual situation with that gentleman. I know this too well. He's rather rich and he looks pretty good. He handles matters with experience and in a mature manner. He's someone with kidney or bladder problems. Forbes nearly raised her hand to shout out her thoughts. If Miss Justice wasn't pleased with that, she had even more information, such as Dwayne Dantes was in a rather pitiful state. His butler studied black magic, his servant worshipped death, and one of his neighbors was a beyonder. There was a secret to his street, and that he had donated the shares to extricate himself from trouble. In short, he perfectly fits the image of a foreigner who is being bullied. I nearly recommended him a medicine that treats kidney and bladder problems. After all, Mr. Moon is skilled in such matters. I can still earn a commission through this. Yes, there's no rush. Let's hear what Miss Justice has to offer. Forbes curbed her heart, which was awash with excitement, as she patiently looked at the girl beside her. However, her body language and emotional upheavals had betrayed her in front of a spectator. Audrey was rather surprised and puzzled by this. She never expected Forbes to know Dwayne Dantes, and seemed to know quite a lot about him. This made her have a new guess as to why Dwayne Dantes was shocked when he saw her. She suspected if Forbes had once said or shown something to the man. Meanwhile, Lin was a blank. He knew nothing about what Miss Justice had mentioned. All he could do was confirm that these happened in Backland. As for the fool Klein, who was leaning back in his chair, leisurely looking at the members, he nearly twitched the corners of his mouth. Miss Justice's commissioning of others to investigate Dwayne Dantes had exceeded his expectation. This was because they had only met once at the charity party. They didn't seem to have any deeper interactions, so there was no need for any further investigation. Could it be that I exposed something about myself that garnered Miss Justice's interest? Or could it be that by donating 10,000 pounds, it shows how much importance Earl Hall places on this? Hence, Miss Justice decided to secretly carry out investigations because she's worried for her father. Klein's mind raced as he hurriedly thought of a solution. At this moment, Audrey deliberated for a moment and looked at Miss Magician and said, an initial investigation for 500 pounds. If you encounter danger, causing the difficulty to rise, I'll compensate you with more. No problem. Forbes hurriedly organized her words inwardly. Just as she was about to say something, she saw the world Jamin Sparrow raise his hand. He had raised his hand. Forbes was taken aback, suspecting that she had seen wrong. Following that, she couldn't help but have thoughts surface in her mind. Mr. World wishes to take this mission. That's right. He's in Backland. But this is an investigation, not a murder. Dwayne Dantes is already pitiful enough. Leave Dwayne alone. Eliminating the investigation target implies completing the investigation. Because there will be no need to make another investigation, what do I do? Do I still take the mission? It's a full 500 pounds. I just need to recount what I previously discovered to receive 200 pounds. But the competitor is Mr. World. Perhaps we can cooperate and not compete. Eh? Why would Mr. World be interested in this mission? His focus is actually on the framing of Baron Syndra's, or the assault on Member of Parliament Mac. For has finally grasped the problem at its core. As for Alger and Catalia, they had already cast their gaze at the world. To them, be it the framing of Baron Syndra's, the assault on Member of Parliament Mac, or Dwayne Dantes' donation of more than 10,000 pounds, they weren't something that needed special notice. However, to have Mr. Fool's Bless choose to accept the investigation mission meant that the problem was bound to be extremely complicated. It made them feel that there were important secrets underlying the matter. Lin didn't think too much about it, but he had also sensed that the seemingly ordinary investigation mission wasn't that simple. His plans on earning some pocket money to make up for the 5,000 pounds that he had just lost were overturned, as he suddenly didn't want to say a word. Dwayne Dantes is really something. There must be a big problem with him that makes Mr. World choose to investigate him. Or are those two cases more important and more critical than I imagined? Audrey's mind stirred as she turned her eyes, and she used the advantage of her seating position to take in all the reactions of the Tarot Club member. Among them, Derek was the only exception. To him, wasn't it normal for the Tarot Club to help each other? If someone gave a mission and one was capable of completing it, wasn't it normal to take it? Audrey moved her gaze to the world and asked with hidden anticipation, "Mr. World, you wish to receive this mission?" After returning to Backland, she had gathered up the news at sea over the past few months, roughly confirming that Mr. World was the crazy adventurer, J.M. Sparrow. While she was deeply impressed by this seemingly polite but dangerous gentleman who had accomplished many great deeds, she felt that her feelings to adventure out at sea had waned. Klein had already thought of a response. He had controlled the world to lower his hand and wait for Miss Justice to ask. At this moment, he made J.M. Sparrow's expression turn solemn and reply with a deep voice, "Dwayne Dantes is an identity." After a period of brief but repeated considerations, Klein decided to expose some information. He made Dwayne Dantes be one of his public facades as a blessed. He believed if he chose to conceal the matter, there was a chance of being exposed in the future. This was because Dwayne Dantes was about to enter Backland's high society. He could find clues to the great smog of Backland or other cases. This way, he might very well need Miss Justice to provide him with assistance. When that happens, the spectator would probably sense something and discover that the world was previously hiding something and that Mr. Fool had never mentioned it. This would lower her sense of belonging and make her even begin suspecting even more matters, causing her faith in the Fool to be borderline dangerous. With two members not knowing each other or knowing of the other's existence, to tacitly work together to complete a specified mission together to accomplish a complete goal sounded perfect, but in reality, its success was very difficult. Even more so, there was no way he could fool her. Therefore, most of the time, honesty was more effective and less worrisome than lying. As for why he didn't directly say that Dantes was J.M. Sparrow, it was because Klein didn't wish to leave the Tarot Club members the impression as to why it was the same person again. He didn't want them to have the impression that he was the only blessed of Mr. Fool that appeared. Dwayne Dantes is only an identity. Audrey sharply read between the lines and had a theory. Then she heard the world simply say, "A common identity that me and my companions share. T will occasionally disguise myself as him." Upon saying that, he emotionlessly swept his gaze across the magician. A common identity occasionally disguises him. That very pitiful Dwayne Dantes is Mr. World. That tycoon with kidney or bladder problems is Mr. J.M. Sparrow. For it felt as though she was struck by lightning as she froze up. Her brain turned numb as she felt struck with fear, subconsciously feeling that Zio's unintentional comment made a lot of sense. When a butler, valet, neighbor, and surroundings had problems, the person that seemed ordinary definitely wouldn't be ordinary. No, it's not the street where Dwayne Dantes stays at, or that he happened to hire a butler with a secret. It's because of that secret that he was selected by Dwayne Dantes, selected by J.M. and Sparrow. The pitiful one isn't Dwayne Dantes, but the Beyonders and Beyonder items around. I was wrong. I shouldn't have gotten Zio to ask the goddess to bless him. It's more of a curse for Mr. World, Force suddenly trembled, thankful that she hadn't left a comment in her note that Dwayne Dantes should check on his kidneys or bladder. Otherwise, she suspected that she wouldn't be able to participate in the next tarot gathering. Or perhaps she would appear in the form of a Beyonder characteristic, sold to the other members by the world. Logically speaking, Mr. World shouldn't know that I'm the magician, but I was carrying Leymano's travels with me. He had used the spellbook before and had added demigod-level Beyonder powers to it. He had definitely observed me in secret, remembering my appearance and evaluating my value. The fear in Fours was surging like a tumultuous sea as her expression was filled with misery. At this moment, she saw Mr. World sweep his cold glance at her feelings of regret instantly becoming that of extreme regret. Thankfully, I didn't rush to answer and mention my impression of Dwayne Dantes. When Fours gradually calmed down from her horror, she couldn't help but think of another problem. During the bodyguard mission, were we the ones protecting Dwayne Dantes, or was Dwayne Dantes protecting us? Should I refund Mr. Jam and Sparrow his money? This, at times, Dwayne Dantes is equivalent to Mr. World. Audrey was first stunned before finding all her questions answered. Force does know Dwayne Dantes, but she didn't know that he's Mr. World. It can be proven from her shocked reaction just now. The reason that Dwayne Dantes was shocked when he saw me was because he recognized Lie. Although this mystical item has changed, it comes from a Beyonder characteristic that Mr. World provided. Perhaps this crazy adventurer can sense it somehow. After all, J.M. and Sparrow can transform into anyone with the powers of shapeshift. Although I only asked Mr. Hanged Man what will happen when an animal consumes a potion, the potion ingredients I gathered later were always in pairs. Mr. World might very well have guessed that I have a spectator beside me based on that, hence, he became wary against Susie, who was secretly observing everyone in the hall. Others might not doubt an animal, but Mr. World is experienced. He must have interacted with Beyonder creatures, so it's very normal for him to be wary against such thing. Which is to say, Dwayne Dantes no, Mr. World Jam and Sparrow knew that I was Justice, but he didn't choose to make contact or communicate with me. There's nothing wrong with his choice of action. Under those circumstances, unless he directly says it, it will be difficult for me to guess or believe it. Furthermore, talking about the Tarot Club in St. Samuel Cathedral is just too crazy. After a brief moment of surprise, Audrey's emotions calmed down, leaving her only with excitement. Apart from the magician Fours who she introduced, this was her first meeting with another member of the Tarot Club. It feels like a historic moment. Yes, Mr. World, as well as Mr. Fool's other blessed. They should also be considered the world. But why was the identity of Dwayne Dantes made? What are they up to? The matter of Baron Syndra's being framed, Member of Parliament Mact being assaulted, and their donation to establish a bursary foundation really are more complicated and important than I originally imagined. Why do I feel that the kingdom's upper echelons are beginning to stir in a state of unrest? I had this feeling back when Prince Edisac died during the Great Smog of Backlash. Today, it's even more intense. Now that I know the identity of Dwayne Dantes, I might be able to participate and cooperate indirectly, reducing the risk my parents might suffer, reducing the risk of the innocent. Amidst her thoughts, Audrey quickly made up her mind. She would accept her father's choice to join the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation. Then she inwardly quipped, wouldn't it be very logical to have Justice from the Tarot Club join the charity foundation established by Mr. World from the Tarot Club? Alger and Catlia weren't too surprised that Dwayne Dantes was the world, that he was the amalgamation of Mr. Fool's blessed. In their minds, another thought flashed through their minds. Something major is about to happen in Backland. Is something brewing in Backland again? An extension of the Great Smog of Backland. As Alger and Catlia wondered about the framing of Baron Syndra's and the assault on Member of Parliament Mact, they planned on using their own respective channels to obtain more detailed information to see if they could discover anything abnormal. They weren't in a rush. They had no intention to directly ask the world what his motives or exact plans were. They felt that he wouldn't answer in detail. At best, he would just make a comment, therefore. They planned to gather more information first to do some preliminary investigation. They would then decide on their subsequent course of action depending on the exact situation. At the same time, they suddenly realized that the public announcement of the identity of Dwayne Dantes seemed to be a boon for them. As long as they paid attention to news of the tycoon, they could roughly grasp the actions of Mr. Fool's Blessed, and from there, they could provide tacit cooperation or help. And since this was just a fake identity, it could be disposed of the moment any problems were exposed. Similarly, they could be a witness for this identity, making Dwayne Dantes appear more realistic. The simplest example was that if this tycoon had a background at sea, Katlia could provide her crew, friends, and partners the relevant information, making them believe that such a man existed. By the time the official organizations attempted to investigate Dwayne Dantes' origins, they would discover that he did exist and that those matters did happen. After a brief silence, Audrey was just about to answer Mr. World's question when she saw Mr. Moon sit up straight and look to the end of the long bronze table, taking the initiative to ask, "What is this public identity used for? Are there deeper problems present in the cases mentioned by Miss Justice?" As a citizen of Backlund, Emlyn was quite concerned about his living environment. "Why don't you investigate all these questions yourself? To not be swept into the vortex, I have already exposed myself." Klein lampooned Emlyn and made the world give a deep chuckle. "Of course. TT's awaiting further investigation." His succinct answer could be translated in detail too. "The two cases definitely have deeper problems, but that's a secret. I don't plan on telling you. Likewise, don't ask about the purpose of the identity of Dwayne Dantes." Although Emlyn was quite bad at reading people, he could still understand what the world was getting at. He chuckled dryly and leaned back, pretending as though he was very pleased with the answer. When Audrey saw this, she used a second to stop the corners of her mouth from curling up. Then she said to the world, "All right, I understand. Thank you for the information." At this moment, she was further convinced that joining the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation was a good thing for her. In the future, if she were to face any danger or had any matters she couldn't handle herself, she could inform Mr. World ahead of time. Then she could head to the foundation as per normal, busying herself in the office adjacent to Dwayne Dantes. "If the psychology alchemists have their suspicions about me, or if they use a mission to test me, I'll get them to meet me at the foundation." Dwayne Dantes' image is completely different from the way he acts as the world above the gray fog. Yes, Mr. World is an experienced actor. Also, Dwayne Dantes is a public identity. He won't always be synonymous to Jamin Sparrow. It's no wonder there are rumors of him liking a wide range of women. A crazy murderer and adventurer like Jamin Sparrow definitely is a good match with a pure and innocent girl. As a spectator, Audrey couldn't help but imagine that. As for Klein, he couldn't help but lampoon when he heard her reply. "What do you mean, thank you for the information? Shouldn't you be paying £500 in investigation fee? Are you treating it as something shared among members?" He made the world nod, without further mentioning the matter of Dwayne Dantes. He then turned to look at Little Son. "Do you have Bizarro Baines over there?" The world paused and added, "Perhaps you use a different name to refer to it. In short, it's good at disguising itself, and it has bizarre power. It's nearly at the demigod level and has a main eye gathered from its characteristic." He deliberately mentioned that it was nearly at the demigod level, not to flaunt the fact to him, but to warn Little Son that this was a very dangerous monster. However, Alger and Katlia didn't pay attention to this point. As a representative of Mr. Fool's Blessed, it was very understandable for the world to purchase demigod-level materials on behalf of his peer. Besides, even if he was preparing it for himself, it wasn't anything astonishing. Jamin Sparrow was already a Sequence 5. It was very common for one to gather the ingredients ahead of time. Without realizing it, they felt that Mr. World's advancement from Sequence 5 was seemingly a good thing. Derek thought and said, "It's not among the commonly seen monsters, but perhaps someone might have encountered it before. I will search through the books or help you ask." The world tersely answered and fell silent. After Fours made her request to buy an ancient wraith's cursed artifact and remnant spirituality, to no avail, the transactions came to an end. Before Mr. Hanged Man could ask the son, For stole a glance at the world and said, "I recently had a strange dream." And it was an almost genuine treasure trove, including, she described in detail the scene she had seen, and towards the end she said, "That is the complicated symbol formed from fate and concealment." Furs was just about to look towards Mr. Fool to request permission to conjure it when she heard the world say, Are you talking about this symbol? The world first made a request before conjuring the symbol. The badge was only the size of an eyeball. On the surface, there were symbols that symbolized fate and concealment. It came from Lanvis, and it was the proof of admission to the hermits of fate's gathering. However, Klein had never made any attempts to participate in it before. Force glanced at it and stammered a reply. Yes, that's it. After she answered it, she realized that Mr. World hadn't only produced the symbol, but he had also produced an item. Suddenly, she came to a realization. Wayne Dentes had chosen Bachland Street for a reason. Just as she had the thought, she saw the world say with a hoarse voice, "That treasure is a trap." He does know, thankfully, I was wise to seek the advice of the experienced, Force heaved a sigh of relief as she smiled. Thank you for your reminder. Audrey asked out of curiosity, Mr. World, what does that symbol represent? Why do you call it a trap? Klein controlled the world and answered simply, it represents a bunch of thieves that called themselves Hermits of Fate. Hermits of Fate, thieves, Alger and Catlia thought as they memorized the two names. Based on their own knowledge, they had a certain guess. The former suspected that it was an organization established by a bunch of marauders. The latter believed that an ancient family from the Fourth Epoch was involved. After some careful recalling, Emlyn White confirmed that he had never heard of such an organization, and he planned on learning more from the upper echelons of the Sanguine. As for Klein, he thought of another problem. That demigod from the Marauder pathway, who was sealed deep in the sewers, hasn't left Bachland Street as expected. He might be hiding at Hazel's place. Furthermore, this demigod isn't staying put. He actually tried to influence Miss Magician via dream. This won't do. I can't give him free rein to do as he wishes. I have to eliminate this latent risk as soon as possible. PLL find my dear poet later and warn him. The grandpa inside his body wouldn't be uninterested in a demigod of the same pathway. With this in mind, Mr. Fool, who was leisurely looking at the members, curled his mouth into a smile. Audrey vaguely sensed the emotional changes of Mr. Fool as she mumbled inwardly. That bunch of thieves who call themselves Hermits of Fate are friends related to Mr. Fool. The talk about the treasure in the dream quickly came to an end. Catlia thought of something and said to the world, I'll give you the intelligence you want this week. At this moment, she was a little curious as to why he needed information on West Ballon. However, she wasn't the sun or the moon who would ask the moment they didn't know something. He was more accustomed to do a search for clues first. All right. The world nodded. Klein sighed inwardly. With this secret organization, many things were indeed much simpler. Seeing that he had nothing else to say, Alger turned to look at the sun. Have you figured out the matter regarding your former chief's mausoleum? Derek said somewhat ashamed, I just made 2 friends. As a Bayunder from the Sun pathway, he won less than 1 in 10 matches when in combat at the training field. After suffering plenty of beatings, he finally established a relationship with his former acquaintances. However, the ones he could call friends only numbered 2. Without waiting for the hanged man to answer him, he hurriedly added, However, I heard that the 6-member council wishes to open the mausoleum. Regardless, they wish to retrieve the characteristic at the very least. In the City of Silver, no one felt that such an operation was problematic. To them, being wasteful was a sin. Alger nodded gently as he changed his admonishing words he was about to say. Not bad. They don't necessarily have to be friends in order to provide you with help. When you establish a bigger network, you will naturally obtain more intel. Strikes the heart upon gaining recognition, Derek was taken aback for 2 seconds. His shame lessened as he said, somewhat embarrassed, I will take further steps to understand this matter. I will work hard to make 2 sources of information know, a friend before the next tarot gathering. Derek quickly made a target for himself. Upon seeing this, Klein made the world hoarsely say, if it involves the domain of death, you can seek my advice. And I can seek Mr. Azek's advice, he silently added. As for Frank Lee's new mushrooms, he had no plans on transferring them to Little Sun, as they were still incomplete. The fruits that were eventually produced were filled with poison and madness. Thank you, Mr. World, Derek answered gratefully. After a short exchange regarding other matters, the Tarot Club entered the learning segment until it ended. Returning to the real world, Klein immediately wanted to resolve the problem of the Marauder demigod, but the plan he conceived of was met with an obstacle at the first step. He had no idea where to find Leonard Mitchell, and the grandpa inside his body. St. Samuel Cathedral. Leonard is most probably underground, but I have no way of entering. He only prays in the cathedral once or twice a week, and he doesn't do it at a fixed time. I can't be heading there thrice a day, all week, just to meet him, right? What kind of crappy plot is this? Is this what's called a stakeout? Even if I really did it, it might not be effective. As a red glove, he might have left Backland. As Klein lampooned, he felt a deep sense of regret. He regretted being too focused on the sophistry and in fooling Leonard Mitchell, thus forgetting to ask for his contact method. I should have said to Leonard, I will inform Klein Morty about his identity being exposed. If he has anything he wishes to say, I will pass it on for him. That way I'll be able to establish a private method of contact. Klein exhaled slowly. All he could do was use his final solution. That was to ask the magic mirror. Drawing the symbols that implied concealment and mystery prying, Klein cast his gaze at the full-body mirror. He saw aqueous light ripple, producing white Lonese text. Exalted great master, your puny, loyal, and humble, terrified servant Arrows is here to answer your summoning. Before answering any questions, I want to say, I was wrong. I was wrong. Klein pricked up his brows and asked, why are you suddenly admitting to a mistake? On the mirror, the white Lonese words warped and turned into new words. In short, I was wrong. After a series of ellipses, the white words trembled into shape. Recently, there have been many people trying to find out about you, and they have learned of the reputation of your present identity. So, Dwayne Dantes' amorous preference of liking anyone beautiful has spread, so much so that even Miss Justice knows of it. Well, that's good. I use the explanation that it's a shared identity. More than one blessed plays as Dwayne Dantes, so having a myriad of preferences can be explained. Look at this mirror. It scared White. Klein was somewhat enlightened as he secretly laughed before saying, it's your turn to ask. The full-body mirror's words remained white as it formed new words. Will you forgive me? No, I mean, are you willing to watch my subsequent performance? This attitude Klein tissed inwardly and said with a sullen expression, work hard. Yes, great master. The mirror surface's ghastly white words bloomed with silver light. Since you have summoned me, do you have a question to ask me? Klein nodded. Yes. Where will Leonard Mitchell be living in the next few days? The silver marks distorted quickly, forming new words, 7 Pinster Street. Beneath the words, the aqueous light rippled, forming a scene. It was a terrace house numbered Unit 7. There was a black-haired, green-eyed youth just about to get his keys. It's the same old place. There hasn't been any change. If I were to pay a visit directly, it will sully Leonard's impression of Dwayne Dante. It will be quite a step down. Get him Lynn White to go. Leonard has probably figured out that the vampire and Sherlock Moriarty, who is also Klein Morty, have ties. The current problem is that it's hard to determine that grandpa's stance. I have no way of confirming his true motives. Giving him a big gift based on his present state might not be appropriate. Perhaps it will bring extreme danger to Leonard. As it doesn't involve myself, doing a divination above the gray fog won't be effective. Thoughts arose in Klein's mind as he changed his plan. Compared to directly informing the grandpa in Leonard's body about the marauder demigod, using Pallas Zarost's or Ammon's name to warn the target to force him to leave the area was a milder method that led to fewer repercussions. Of course, the premise is that I don't expose myself. Klein pondered for a few seconds and asked again, where is the demigod beside Hazel Macht hiding? The mirror's surface had aqueous light ripple out as the scene changed. On a thick carpet with beautiful embroidery, there was a small leather sofa. On the surface of the single-seater was a white, furry cushion. In the middle of it was a gray rat. Compared to its kind, its eyes were closer to dark red. Rat, that marauder demigod has parasitized a rat. And he's sleeping inside Hazel's room in broad daylight. He got himself what looks like a very expensive cushion. He had to transform into this because I foiled his plan. Klein was surprised before he felt a little amused. The scene fixed as silver lines surfaced. Great master, what other instructions do you have for me? Very sharp, Klein tersely answered and said, use the mirror in the room to warn that demigod. Tell him that all around this street, there is an angel from the marauder pathway with ill intentions plying. Furthermore, blasphemer Ammon might come at any time. All right, master. I'll do it immediately. The words on the mirror sparkled. In Hazel's room, the gray rat felt his spiritual perception stirred as he hurriedly stood up and cast his gaze on the full-body mirror in the room. On the surface of the mirror Words that seemed to be written with fresh blood that had yet to coagulate appeared. Leave this area. The gray rat's gaze froze for a second, as it fell silent for a moment. Why? The blood seemed to flow as the words spread out and formed new words. The surrounding area has an angel from the Marauder pathway in urgent need of replenishment plying. This pathway is the nemesis of all high-sequence Beyonder. Blasphemer Ammon is rushing over. TM warning you because I do not wish for them to benefit. The gray rat squeaked softly before asking in a deep voice, who are you? It was extremely frustrated that the strength it accumulated would often be forced to be drained. Otherwise, it could use astromancy to confirm the situation. The full-body mirror, which had dimmed at some point in time, suddenly had bloody words appear again, presenting new information. V already answered one question of yours. Based on the principle of reciprocity, it's my turn to ask. Following that, a new line of bloody red text appeared underneath. After you hurriedly parasitized a rat, you should be influenced by the body's construct and hormones. Now which entity will make you have the desire to mate? Female human, female rat, male rat, or all of the above? Please answer. At this moment, Hazel cracked open the door. And for some reason, the gray rat inside didn't notice it, seemingly affected by something. The door opened slightly again, as Hazel discovered that the entity who claimed to be a demigod that existed in legends was staring at the mirror in a day. It seemed infatuated with its present appearance, a gray rat. Hazel's brows twitched slightly as she subconsciously paused her action of opening the door. Then she saw the gray rat's body tremble, its red eyes effusing a clear murderous look. Stop fooling around with me. The gray rat growled. It turned its head to leave the room, but invisible chains suddenly bound its rat's body. This strength wasn't anything for it to fear when it was in its optimal state, but now, everything it had accumulated had been drained. The latest action was to infuse a dream to the Beyonder bodyguard, whom Dwayne Dantes had hired. Boom! A thick silver bolt of lightning descended down from the sky, smiting the gray rat. The scene before Hazel's eyes turned blinding white as she couldn't see anything. Immediately, her vision recovered as she found the gray rat on the ground, charred black. Its limbs were twitching,